There is a specific color of white that only exists in hospitals. It is blinding, sterile, and indifferent to the suffering it surrounds. I woke up drowning in that whiteness. My throat felt like it had been scrubbed with sandpaper, a side effect of the intubation tube. But that discomfort was nothing compared to the fire raging in my left flank. It felt as though someone had carved me open with a rusty spoon and forgotten to sew me back up. I tried to shift, to alleviate the pressure, but a jolt of agony pinned me to the mattress, stealing the breath from my lungs. It was a throbbing, hollow void, a physical reminder of what I had just given away. I am Arthur. I am 63 years old. For 30 years, I have been the chief of operations for Vantage Logistics. I have moved fleets of trucks across continents, navigated customs wars, and managed supply chains that kept half the country fed. But looking at the IV drip counting out the seconds of my life, I realized I had never managed a logistical challenge quite like this. I turned my head, fighting the fog of the morphine. Through the glass partition of the recovery suite, I could see the adjacent room. Julian was there. He was asleep, hooked up to monitors that beeped with a steady, reassuring rhythm. Julian Vance, the CEO, the founder, the man I considered my brother and everything but blood. 3 months ago, he was a ghost, his skin gray, his body failing as his kidneys shut down. He was dying by inches. I was a match. I didn't hesitate. I didn't ask for a contract. I didn't ask for a raise. I simply offered, because that is what you do for family. That is what loyalty looks like. Or so I thought. I closed my eyes, letting the drugs pull me back under. I remembered the night before the surgery. Julian sat on the edge of my hospital bed, his hands shaking, tears streaming down his face. He held my hand, me, his employee, his subordinate, and squeezed it tight. "You're saving my life, Arthur," he had whispered, his voice cracking. "I don't know how to repay this. We are family. You have a job for life. I'll take care of you." "Rest now, boss," I had told him. I was a fool, a loyal, sentimental fool. 6 weeks later. The rain in Seattle is cold in November, the kind of damp that settles into your bones and refuses to leave. I walked through the sliding glass doors of the Vantage headquarters, my cane clicking rhythmically against the polished marble floor of the lobby. I shouldn't have been there.
My surgeon had told me I needed at least 8 weeks of bed rest. The incision site was still angry, weeping fluid if I moved too quickly, and the fatigue hit me in waves, like a heavy blanket being thrown over my head. But the quarterly audit was coming up. I knew the numbers better than anyone. I knew where the bodies were buried, metaphorically speaking, and I knew Julian would be drowning in paperwork without me. "Good morning, Mr. Vance," the receptionist said. She didn't look up from her screen. She didn't ask how I was. She just tapped away. "Morning, Sarah," I grunted, pressing the elevator button. The ride up to the executive floor felt longer than usual. My side ached. I adjusted my coat, trying to hide the bulk of the bandages wrapped around my midsection. I wanted to look strong. I wanted Julian to see that his investment had paid off, that the rock, as he called me, was back in position. The elevator doors pinged open. I walked down the hallway toward the boardroom. The glass walls were frosted, but I could see silhouettes inside. I pushed the door open. "Sorry I'm late," I said, forcing a smile, expecting a cheer, a welcome back, maybe just a nod of gratitude. The room went silent. Julian sat at the head of the table. He looked incredible. The gray pallor was gone, replaced by a healthy, rosy flush. His eyes were bright. He had gained weight. He looked 10 years younger. He was literally glowing with the energy provided by the organ I had carved out of my own body. He wasn't smiling. "Arthur," Julian said. His voice was flat, corporate, devoid of the brotherhood that had filled the hospital room 6 weeks ago. "You were early." "The audit," I said, limping to my usual chair at his right hand. "I couldn't let you handle the Eastern European manifests alone." I reached for the chair. "Actually, Arthur," Julian said. He pointed to a chair against the wall, the observer's chair. My hand froze on the leather back of my seat. Sitting in it was a young man I had never seen before. He couldn't have been more than 28. He wore a suit that cost more than my car, and had a haircut that screamed Ivy League ambition. He looked at me with a blank, shark-like expression. I don't understand," I said, confusion clouding my mind. "I am the director of operations," Julian said. Julian sighed.
It was a sound of impatience, the sound a man makes when he has to explain something simple to a child. He didn't look me in the eye. He stared at a spot on the wall just over my left shoulder. "We're restructuring, Art," he said. "The board feels we need a fresh perspective. We're pivoting to a digital-first supply chain model, AI integration, blockchain ledgers." I repeated. I felt a phantom throb in my missing kidney. "I built this supply chain, Julian. I navigated us through 3 recessions." "And we appreciate your service," Julian said, reciting a line from a handbook. "But the industry is changing, and frankly, with your—" "I gave you my kidney, Julian," I whispered. My voice shook. The young man, Marcus, typed something on his iPad. He didn't even blink. Julian finally looked at me. His eyes were cold. There was no gratitude there, only calculation. "That was a personal choice, Arthur," he said softly, "and a noble one, but this is business." He slid a thick manila envelope across the polished mahogany table. It stopped inches from my hand. "This is your severance package," Julian said. 2 weeks' pay. "We're treating it as a voluntary retirement, so it saves us the unemployment tax." I stood there, clutching my side where the stitches were still pulling tight, staring at the man who was literally filtering his blood through a piece of my body. He was firing me. He waited until he got the organ, waited until I was physically broken and uninsurable, and then he discarded me like a used casing. If you've ever given everything to a job or a person only to realize you were just a resource to be mined, hit that subscribe button, because Julian made one fatal calculation. He forgot that as the operations chief, I didn't just know where the trucks went, I knew where the money went. I asked. The words tasted like ash. "And no insurance?" "Julian, my anti-rejection medication costs $3,000 a month. Without insurance, I'll lose the house." Julian shrugged, a small, elegant movement of his shoulders. "Cobra is available," he said, "though it is expensive. I suggest you look into state aid. You're 63, Art. Maybe it's time to just—" "Rest," I echoed. "Marcus will escort you out," Julian said, turning his attention back to the papers in front of him. "We'll mail your personal effects. No need to clear your desk." "Proprietary data," I scoffed. "It's my work. It's company property." He didn't look up again. Marcus stood up. He was tall, athletic. He walked over to me. "This way, sir," he said. He didn't touch me, but his presence was a threat. I looked at Julian one last time. I wanted to scream. I wanted to lunge across the table and tear the organ out of him with my bare hands. I wanted to take back the life I had given him. But I didn't. I couldn't. I was a 63-year-old man with a cane and a hole in his side. I turned around and walked out. The walk to the lobby was a blur. Security met us at the elevator. 2 large men I had hired myself 5 years ago. They couldn't look me in the eye. They escorted me to the front doors like a criminal. They pushed me out into the rain. I stood on the sidewalk, the cold water soaking through my coat, clutching my cane. I didn't have a box. I didn't have my photos of my wife. I didn't have my lucky stapler. I had nothing. My side throbbed, a deep, sickening ache. I hailed a cab. I couldn't walk to the bus stop. When I got home, Martha was in the kitchen. She looked up, smiling, expecting to hear about my triumphant return. "What?" she asked, seeing my face. "What happened? You're soaking wet." I collapsed into a kitchen chair. I put the manila envelope on the table. "He fired me, Martha. Julian. He fired me. 2 weeks' pay." Martha's face went white. She sat down slowly. "But the medicine," she stammered. "The transplant. Arthur, we have $6,000 in savings. That's 2 months of bills." "I know." She started to cry. Not loud sobs, but quiet, terrified weeping. The sound of a woman watching her security dissolve. I sat there, listening to the rain hit the window.
I felt like a fool. A used, discarded fool. I had cut myself open for a monster. But as the shock began to fade, replaced by the cold, hard edge of panic, something else started to creep in. Suspicion. I stared at the severance agreement lying on the table. It was standard boilerplate. But the timing. Why now? Why not wait 6 months? Why not wait until I was recovered? Julian was cruel, but he was also pragmatic. Firing me now created a risk of a lawsuit. It was sloppy. Unless he needed me gone. Immediately. I closed my eyes, forcing my mind to go back to the weeks before the surgery. The audit. I had been preparing the quarterly reports. I had noticed something in the Eastern European sector.
A series of shipping manifests for heavy machinery going into a shell company in Estonia. The weights didn't match the cargo descriptions. The invoices were paid from a bank in Cyprus. I had brought it to Julian. He had laughed it off. Just a glitch in the legacy software, Art. I'll have IT patch it. Focus on the surgery. I had focused on the surgery. I had let it go. But now, Martha, I said, standing up. In your coat, she sniffled. Who are you calling? Not yet, I said. I dialed Elias. Elias was a forensic accountant who used to consult for Vantage. He met me an hour later at a diner on the outskirts of town. It smelled of grease and old coffee. Elias looked like a conspiracy theorist, disheveled hair, ink stains on his fingers. He listened to my story without blinking. When I got to the part about the termination of insurance, his jaw tightened. He played you, Art, Elias said, his voice low. I know he used me for the kidney, Elias, I said. No, Elias shook his head. It's not just the kidney. Think about the timing. The fiscal year ends in 2 weeks. He leaned over the table. He didn't just want the kidney. He needed you out of the building before the books closed. You were the only one who knew the old codes. I asked. Elias smirked grimly. They weren't machinery. They were empty crates. He's washing money for someone, Art. Big money. And he needed the old guard gone so he could replace you with that kid, Marcus. I sat back. The waitress poured more coffee, but I didn't touch it. It made sense. It made perfect, terrible sense. He hadn't just murdered my career. He had tried to bury the witness. I asked, I don't have access. He locked me out. Elias looked at me with pity. Then we're dead in the water, Art. I looked out the window at the rain. I thought about Julian's smile. I thought about the emptiness in my side. Then a memory surfaced. A habit. Julian was a visionary. He believed in the cloud. He believed in digital security managed by third parties. I was old school. I was operations. I believed in redundancy. I believed that if a truck could crash, a server could crash. Elias, I said slowly. Because Julian forgot something. I said, a small, cold fire starting to burn in my gut. He forgot that I worked from home on weekends. We drove back to my house in silence. I went into the garage. It was cold and dusty. I pushed aside boxes of Christmas decorations and old lawn equipment. In the corner, under a stack of National Geographic magazines, was a fireproof safe box. I keyed in the code. It beeped and popped open. Inside lay a black external hard drive. It was labeled in white marker, Vantage Archive, Ops Backup 2018-2024. I picked it up. It was heavy, cold. I walked into the house. I plugged it into my dusty personal laptop on the kitchen table. Elias stood over my shoulder. The screen flickered. The drive spun up with a high-pitched whine. The folder window opened. Thousands of files, shipping manifests, invoices, and there, in a folder marked discrepancies, were the raw data files for the Estonian shipments. Elias gasped. He whispered, Look at the dates. Look at the amounts. Art, this isn't just tax fraud. I scrolled through the list. It was all there. Every lie. Every stolen dollar. I touched the scar on my side through my shirt. It was angry and red, throbbing with the beat of my heart. You took my kidney, Julian, I whispered to the glowing blue screen. I looked at Elias. What? Her eyes were hard. He didn't just fire you, Arthur. I touched my side instinctively. The phantom ache was always there, a dull reminder of the void. I asked. My voice was raspy. I was tired. The lack of proper medication was starting to take its toll. I was rationing my pills, cutting them in half to make them last. We can, Sarah said, but we have to be smart.
If we file now, he'll settle. I don't want his money, I said, surprising myself with the ferocity of the statement. I want him exposed. Then we wait, Sarah said. She leaned back. We let him feel safe. It's November. The fiscal year ends in December. He fired you to clear the path for the audit. Let him file his tax returns. Let him sign his name to the fraud. Once he files with the IRS, it's a federal crime. So we waited. The next 3 months were a strange, agonizing limbo. I was living in a house I could barely afford to heat. My severance pay had evaporated in 2 weeks. I applied for unemployment, but Julian's lawyers contested it, claiming I was fired for cause, gross negligence. It was a lie, but it tied up the payments and bureaucratic red tape. I stood in line at the county health department, clutching a number ticket, waiting to apply for state-subsidized medication. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. I looked around at the other people in line, tired mothers, veterans, the forgotten and the discarded. I felt a deep, burning shame. I had been a chief of operations. I had managed millions of dollars in logistics, and now I was begging for a discount on the pills that kept my body from rejecting the nothingness inside me. But the shame didn't break me. It hardened me. I spent my days at home, sitting in my recliner with a heating pad on my side, watching the news on my tablet. Julian was everywhere. He was on the cover of Forbes. I watched a video interview he did with a major network. He sat in his office, my old office, looking vibrant, healthy, and powerful. "You look incredible, Mr. Vance," the reporter gushed, "considering you were in critical condition just months ago." Julian smiled. It was that charming, self-deprecating smile that had fooled me for 30 years. "Divine intervention," he said, touching his chest. "I was lucky. I prayed, and I was given a second chance. It really changes your perspective." He didn't mention me. He didn't mention the donor. He acted as if the kidney had descended from heaven on a golden parachute.
I threw my coffee mug at the wall. It shattered, leaving a dark stain on the wallpaper. "Divine intervention," I spat. "It was me, you son of a bitch." Martha came running in. She saw the broken ceramic. She saw me shaking. She didn't say a word. She just swept up the pieces and handed me a fresh cup. By February, the trap was set. Julian had filed his taxes. The fraud was cemented in ink. We entered the discovery phase of the lawsuit. Sarah sent a subpoena for the Internal Service, specifically requesting all communications regarding my employment and the medical leave. Julian's lawyers handed over a dump of thousands of documents, hoping to bury us in paper. But they underestimated Elias. He built an algorithm to sift through the metadata. And then, the midpoint twist hit us like a freight train. I was back in Sarah's office. It was raining again. Sarah looked pale. She turned her laptop monitor toward me. "We found something," she said quietly. "On the HR server." It was an email chain, dated 2 months before the surgery, before I had even agreed to the donation. It was between Julian and the HR director, a woman named Linda who I had known for years. Subject: the Arthur problem. "Julian, we need a contingency plan. The doctors say he's the best match. His antibodies are low. If we go to the National Registry, I'll be waiting 2 years. Linda, he's vital to ops, Julian. If we move him to the donor track, he'll be out for months. Julian, I don't care about ops. I care about surviving. Keep him happy. Stroke his ego. Tell him he's family. Whatever it takes to get him on that table. But once the recovery period is stable, once the organ takes, cut him loose. We can't have him looking at the books for the merger. He's too old school. Firing him post-op. Julian, offer him 2 weeks. He's 63. He's soft. He loves the company too much to fight back. He's a spare part, Linda. I read the email 3 times. He's a spare part. The room spun. The nausea rose in my throat, bitter and acidic. He hadn't just fired me to cover up a crime. He hadn't just panicked. He had premeditated the exploitation of my body. He had farmed me. He had looked at me, his loyal friend of 30 years, and seen nothing but a bag of organs to be harvested,
I felt a tear slide down my cheek. It wasn't sadness. It was the final drop of loyalty leaving my body. He harvested me, I whispered. Sarah placed her hand on mine. He did, Arthur.
The deposition took place 2 weeks later. We rented a conference room in a neutral hotel downtown. It was sterile, beige, and quiet, save for the hum of the videographer's equipment. Julian arrived 20 minutes late. He walked in flanked by 3 lawyers in expensive suits. He looked annoyed, checking his platinum watch, treating this whole proceeding like a scheduling conflict that was keeping him from a tea time. He saw me sitting across the table. He flashed that reptilian smile. "Good to see you, Art," he said, breezy and light. "You look tired." I didn't smile back. I didn't blink. I stared at him with the intensity of a man looking through the scope of a rifle. "Sit down, Mr. Vance," Sarah commanded. Julian sat. He adjusted his cufflinks. He looked bored. Sarah began the questioning. She started gently, almost casually. She asked about my tenure. She asked about my role. Julian answered with practiced ease, painting me as a beloved but declining employee who had simply aged out of his usefulness. "He was great in his day," Julian said, shrugging. "But the industry moved on." "Fresh blood," Sarah repeated. She reached into her file. She pulled out a document. "Did you write this email, Mr.?" She slid the Arthur problem printout across the table. Julian picked it up. He glanced at it. His face went pale. The rosy flush of health drained away, leaving him looking gray and old. His hand trembled slightly as he set the paper down. I don't recall this specific correspondence," he stammered. This is out of context." "Succession planning," Sarah said dryly. Julian's lawyer interjected. "Objection." "I'll move on," Sarah said. She reached into her file again. She pulled out a stack of spreadsheets, the shipping manifests, the bank records from Cyprus, the Estonian shell companies. She laid them out on the table, one by one, like tarot cards predicting his doom. Sarah asked, "Is this out of context? Or is this the reason you needed Mr.?" Julian stopped looking at his watch. He started sweating. I could see the beads forming on his forehead. He looked at his lead counsel, his eyes wide with panic. The lawyer was frantically whispering to him to stop talking, to plead the fifth. But the damage was done. The silence in the room was deafening. The camera was rolling. Every drop of sweat, every twitch of his eye was being recorded in high definition. I ran a company," Julian choked. "You committed fraud," Sarah said.
Julian slumped in his chair. He looked defeated. But I wasn't done. I leaned forward. The movement pulled at my scar, a sharp, grounding pain. "Julian," I said. He looked at me. His eyes were filled with terror. He knew. He knew I knew everything. "My kidney," I said quietly. The room went silent. Even the lawyers stopped shuffling papers. I asked. Julian swallowed hard. He nodded involuntarily. "Good," I said. "It's filtering your blood right now." I stood up slowly, leaning on the table with both hands. "You thought I was soft, Julian. You thought I was just a resource, a spare part you could use and throw away." I leaned closer. "It cleans the toxins from the body," I whispered. "That's its job." Julian stared at me, his mouth open, unable to speak. The arrogance was gone. The visionary was gone. All that was left was a thief caught in the light. "We're done here," Sarah said. The fallout was swift and catastrophic. We didn't leak the tape to the press. We didn't have to. Sarah attached the video of the deposition and the forensic accounting report to a public filing in the civil suit. Court records are public domain. A legal blogger found it within 24 hours. By the next morning, it was the lead story on every financial news network. The Visionary of the Year title was stripped. 3 days later, the IRS raided Vantage Logistics. I watched from my car parked across the street as agents in windbreakers carrying boxes marched out the front doors. They weren't just taking files. They were taking the company apart. Julian was indicted on 12 counts of wire fraud, tax evasion, and embezzlement. The board of directors, terrified of the PR nightmare, convened an emergency meeting on Sunday night. They voided his golden parachute.
They stripped him of his stock options. He lost everything. His reputation, his wealth, his legacy. 6 weeks later, I sat on the porch of my house. The spring air was warm. The rain had finally stopped. Martha came out with the mail. She handed me a large envelope from Jenkins and Associates. I opened it. It was the settlement check. The board had settled immediately to keep the case out of a jury trial. The number on the check was substantial. It was enough to retire, enough to pay for the best doctors for the rest of my life, enough to secure Martha's future so she would never have to worry about the heating bill again. But looking at the zeros, I realized it wasn't about the money.
I put the check back in the envelope. I picked up my tablet. The news was playing. There was a shot of Julian being led out of the federal courthouse. He was in handcuffs. He looked gaunt. His skin was sallow. The stress was eating him alive. I touched the scar on my side. It had faded to a thin silver line. It didn't throb anymore. The phantom pain was gone. I sipped my coffee. It tasted rich and warm. I was whole. I looked at the image of the man who had tried to harvest me. "Take care of it, Julian," I whispered, closing the screen.